everybody. My name is Yan Dai. I also go by Diane. I'm a PhD student major in educational psychology at Auburn University. Today is my great honor to invite Dr. Peters-Burton from George Mason University. She's going to talk about her research career and give some suggestions to our graduate students and upcoming scholars. Hi, Dr. Peters-Burton. Would you please tell us? Hi, I'm sorry.
Hi, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate your time. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about you and when did you join the study and self-regulated learning special interest group?
Great, thanks. So prior to being a scholar, I was a classroom teacher. So I taught high school and middle school science and math for 15 years. Prior to that, I was an engineer for a year. So I did mechanical drawings and things like that for a year, but transferred my math and science skills to the schools. And when I was a graduate student, I was encouraged to join AERA. And since AERA is so enormous, it was the SSRL SIG that felt more like family to me. So when I went to that first business meeting as a graduate student, I was in awe of all the amazing researchers in the room and was so excited to be able to, be on the periphery of that kind of thing. So that was my goodness, almost 20 years ago.
Oh, it's a long time ago.
Yes. So I was a high school and middle school science and math teacher for 15 years. And this is my 16th year in the academy.
Wow. So now you have been this family member for more than 20 years.
I have,
yes. Now let's start talk something about your research. How would you like to describe your research interest and how did you get into this line of research?
Great. So I mentioned that I was a high school teacher and middle school teacher because that's where my research interest started. So back when I was about 12 years into my teaching career, I did what they call national boards, which is you put together a video and written portfolio to show your skills as a teacher and explain teaching and learning in your classroom. And I became absolutely fascinated with the idea of showing student evidence of student learning. So, what went through my head before I started my research journey was, how can I show somebody it's evidence for research? How can I be sure it's evidence of learning? How can I be sure that my students are learning? So that was really what I grabbed onto, and then pursued my PhD at George Mason University under the tutelage of Anastasia Kitsantis. But I did not start with Anastasia. So here's how I got involved in self-regulated learning. So when I was a teacher, I knew that my students, there were this group of students who really got what science was. Like, science depends on evidence. If you do the same thing, you typically get the same result. And if you don't, there's a reason for it. So it's very replicable.
Replication,
and so and that's something that people can depend on. And so to me, that was a really strong piece of why you should know science. But what I did notice is that many of my students came in, went through the motions, did the investigations, answered the questions, and then went on their way and really didn't think about those big meta ideas.
Yeah, that's true. They didn't see the big picture.
Yeah, exactly. And like why we're doing what we're doing in science to try to figure out the natural world around us.
Right.
So I was starting to study, how students learn science and things like that in my PhD. And I knew that I wanted to study epistemic thinking. So I wanted to know why science, how do people understand science as a discipline and what do they do with that? But I had no mechanism. And so luckily my second year of my PhD studies, somebody suggested that I take Anastasia Kitstantis's self-regulated learning class.
Oh,
And so I'm in this class, and maybe 3 classes in, it was an aha moment that has changed my life forever.
wow.
And I said, that is the mechanism.
Yeah.
You know, so I was able to study how students self-regulate their own epistemic thinking for my dissertation. And Anastasia was the chair of my dissertation. So she was really, yeah. So she was really the one who really, you know, welcomed me into the SSRL SIG and showed me around and introduced me to people. So
Yeah.
I owe her my career.
Oh, she'll be happy to hear that.
So since then, my dissertation was actually on an intervention with 8th grade students. So I was studying student self-regulated learning, like from student evidence.
Yeah.
But very early on in my assistant professor career, I realized that studying student evidence is important, but it's much more fruitful to study how teachers are teaching self-regulated learning, because I can't bypass teachers. You know, they're really the currency in the classroom. And so my work shifted from looking at student SRL to how teachers engage students in SRL, and then the outcomes from that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And can you please talk about how did your research evolve over time? And tell us your research that connects with a special interest group audience and something about your recent study?
Absolutely. So as I said, I shifted a bit from student to teacher self-regulated learning. And then within teacher self-regulated learning, I really was very interested in a book chapter that Tim Cleary wrote in 2011 on microanalysis. Because I am a mixed method, you know, I do mixed method studies. I was very interested in being able to incorporate both qualitative and quantitative evidence in how teachers were understanding self-regulated learning and teaching that to their students and monitoring their students and, you know, that following outcomes.
Yeah.
So I do professional development with science teachers quite a bit. And so I incorporate self-regulated learning in the context of whatever the professional development is. So this particular study was with elementary teachers learning how to teach earth science using inquiry methods, which are very scary to teachers because it's very open-ended and it's not easy to assess. And so I thought understanding teachers' self-regulated learning in that class would be very helpful to understanding how they're going to use it in the classroom and how much they'll maintain it and take away from the professional development. So I was at AERA presenting on this paper.
Oh,
and
cool.
and Tim Cleary walked in. I did not know him at this time, and he walked into my presentation, and I was very nervous and gave my presentation, and I'm sure I skipped every third word because I was so nervous. But he walked out before I was able to talk with him, and I thought, oh, I'm really not doing this right. I'm not going down the right road. And I found him later, and I said, oh, you know, why did you walk out? Like, can we talk about this? And he said, no, you were good. He had to go to his own presentation. So during the same session, like, he came to see my presentation and he gave me great advice. He actually even looked through the paper before I sent it for publication. And that's when I started collaborating with both Anastasia and with Tim. So, so yeah, it's been many years now that we've been collaborating together. So my work has evolved because of their influence, which is great. And so my work shifted a little bit from microanalysis now to using technologies to support self-regulated learning. So the 3 of us are currently working on a project called the Science Practices Innovation Notebook. That is an electronic notebook for high school students in science to help them self-regulate their processes and data practices using computational thinking and self-regulated learning structures. So in a nutshell, I started with students and how they
Mhm.
self-regulate, and then move to how teachers self-regulate in professional development, to how teachers help students self-regulate. And now we're building technologies with teachers to help them self-regulate.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a journey. And I just finished writing a book.
Oh,
That kind of
congratulations.
brings a lot of this together. Thank you. I'm going
Yeah.
to do a little book promotion here, right? And it's called A Practical Approach to
Mhm.
Supporting Science and Engineering Students Using Self-Regulated Learning. It's going to be published by Cambridge University Press. Should be out in spring
Yeah, we're
of
looking forward to
23.
the book. Yeah, and the audience, if you're interested in the book, please find it.
Yes, yeah, and it does incorporate. It is a very practical approach to taking Zimmerman's self-regulated learning theory and its coaching structure, and
Mhm.
how do you use that in the classroom.
It's very practical.
Yes, I'm hoping that teachers and teacher educators and potentially self-regulated learning researchers can pick it up and sort of use it as they would.
It's kind of like a how-to book, right?
It is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm hoping to use it in some professional development, because I've done professional development with teachers with self-regulated learning. However, Tim's book has been really helpful. We've used that in professional development, but this
Yeah.
is specifically for science education.
Mhm.
So I think it'll speak to science teachers and
So
teacher educators.
yeah, the book has both theoretical and pedagogical meaning. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that book.
Yes. Yeah, if you needed to categorize my work, it would be application of educational psychology.
Mhm.
So I take theory and then try to make them work in the classroom and get them, efficiently used in the classroom so that people can continue to maintain them instead of it just being another thing that teachers need to kind of worry about.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Our next question is, what do you really enjoy about the research you're involved in? Because I can feel your passion in your research is so meaningful. And can you
Thank
talk a little about, yeah, what do you really enjoy about that part?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and I've already said the people I work with are always a joy to work with.
Uh-huh. Right.
But the actual research, I really enjoy seeing the students when they really don't understand self-regulated learning, and then either our interventions or the teacher helps them to recognize that they can be aware of their learning structures and change them and adapt them along the way. That those students get so excited because, number one, they feel some agency. They feel like, oh, I have control over my learning. It's not just something that happens or, something that was bequeathed to me or something.
Right.
So an example is an eighth grade student came up to me after we did a study where we gave them metacognitive prompts to help them understand, science epistemic understandings. And this eighth grader comes up and says, I always knew I had to do something in science, and I didn't know what I needed to do until now. So thank you. And that I cried.
Yes, amazing. Right.
It was
Yeah.
so moving. It was so moving. And the teachers that I work with are so fully invested in self-regulated learning. It's really hard to add another thing in the classroom. Teachers are instructors and mentors and sociologists and healthcare workers. And, they ask teachers to do so much.
Right.
I just always appreciate, the openness that teachers have when I come to them and say, hey, I think I can help your students be more effective and efficient in learning. Would you want to hear me out? And they say yes, and they open their classroom to me, and that is very enjoyable.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
I feel very fortunate. Yes.
Yeah, I bet those students are very blessed to be in this research.
Not all of them. It's not all bright and shiny, but I also like the students who are the reluctant students, and they just have to be them, to be themselves.
Yeah, to some degree, they feel like they are empowered. They got the autonomy, so they can self-regulate themselves. They might get motivated because of that.
Absolutely, and it's a lifelong gift too. If
Yeah,
you can
it
help
is.
someone learn how to self-regulate their own learning, they can apply it in just anything they do in life.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And would you please tell us, like, how do you balance your teaching and the research? You've been a teaching for more than 15 years, and also you're a productive researcher. So are there any challenges to your teaching or research along the way? If so, how did you overcome them? And how did you balance your time?
I balance my time by not thinking about all of it at once. I chunk it up and I write myself a lot of lists and I cross out a lot of things.
Uh-huh.
But one way, especially when I was a younger researcher, what I did was I researched my own classroom because
Oh.
self-regulated learning, is so universal. I researched how pre-service teachers learn how to teach science. And
Mhm.
so I not only was able to get publications from that, but I was able to improve my teaching.
I
So,
see.
so if you look at, self-regulated learning is so powerful that I was self-regulated. I was self-regulating my own learning about
Mhm.
teaching teachers while they were self-regulating about them learning how to teach, so it was this kind of tiered thing that
Mhm.
it really is very beneficial and it reinforces each other.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful. And then, of course, when I met Dr. Cleary, Dr. Kit Santos, that I learned so much from them, from Dr. Winnie, from everyone who spoke to me, at
Mhm.
AERA. And I am, forever grateful for their advice and their ideas. And
Mhm.
it really does sort of accumulate and it gets some momentum. So I feel like there's a point where a lot of this momentum is going. And the book that I just wrote was really sort of a summary of
Mhm.
everything. And it helped me think through where I want to go from here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my recommendation, like along your career, is make sure you take time to stop and reflect and
Mhm.
look at what you've done and what you want to do and how you'll plan to get to that next point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very important.
So when I run into areas that are very difficult, in fact, so I early on I started working with epistemic network analysis,
Mhm.
and so it's social network analysis, but we're using ideas instead of people. It was not as very popular idea, and it took a lot of explanation.
Oh,
But yeah, and I think my very first article took 8 different tries.
wow.
I had 7 rejections, and the
Oh
eighth
my goodness, that's a
eighth one
lot.
took it. So it finally, worked out on the 8th one. And
Uh-huh.
so you just sort of persevere. I would recommend to upcoming scholars that when you write a paper, focus on a journal. And if that journal declines it, there's
Mhm.
gotta be a home for your paper. So listen to what the reviewers say, make your adaptations, stick to what you
Mhm.
feel is really important, and find a good fit for that article.
Yeah.
So I think efficiencies really help. Um, and being able to kind of have a plan, but be flexible with your plan
Mhm.
is helpful for both teaching and research.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, it's amazing. Yeah. How long did that take for your paper eventually published from your
Yes,
first?
it was 8 years. It took 8
Oh
years.
my
And this was
gosh.
a paper where I actually got a sabbatical,
Mhm.
co-taught in a middle school classroom, added self-regulated learning to the curriculum. I always joke that like the only thing I could have done more was to put on a cape and fly. But it was too much, it was just too much to
Yeah.
explain it. The word limits really was very difficult to fit. But you just keep coming back to a problem, looking at it with a new perspective. And I
Mhm.
was able to mold it in a way that then it was understandable and it was useful. And I finally got it published.
Yeah, I really admire those resilience. Those are important for graduate students because sometimes we got a denial, feel like, well, this is the end of the world. It's a piece of shit. Just throw it in the trash. Yeah, start to self-deny.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So, um, Yeah, I just, take your reviews seriously, but also know that you have your one unique contribution to this world,
Yeah.
and so stick by what you feel is important, but listen to people around you, and you can find that happy medium.
Yeah, this experience is really very inspiring for us.
Thanks.
Do you have any unforgettable moment for teaching?
Well, I have an unforgettable moment of high school teaching,
Mhm.
and is that okay?
Sure, sure.
Okay. So when I started teaching in Virginia, I was teaching math, and I was
Mhm.
teaching algebra to students who had taken algebra 3 times. This was
Uh-huh.
their last time. If they didn't pass it, they
Oh.
wouldn't graduate. And so
Mhm.
these were students who were just really beaten down and just angry at the world. So I'm a new teacher, and I get up in front of them and I'm teaching math. And the usual way you teach math is, you're just lecturing and then asking them to do problems and checking their problems, and it
Mhm.
wasn't working. So I threw everything out the window and I said, okay, we're adding polynomials today. And I know it has nothing to do with your lives, but
Mhm.
I'm going to let you figure it out. And so here's the problem to add the polynomials. What do you think the answer is and why? And so, the students were like, ah. So finally, this student, Erwin, came up, and he was like this tough kid I was terrified of.
Oh.
And he came up to the board, and I thought, oh, what have I done? And he's like writing his solution on the board, and he was like really invested because, I gave him a chance to do it on his own instead of telling him how to do it.
Oh, that's good.
And he got it right. And so he explained it to the students, and everybody was like, oh, okay. And they sat up and paid attention. So this really rough class was like, we want to learn more now, and let us
Oh.
figure this out. So it was great. And we named ways to do these problems after the students. So that was Erwin's method. And
Mhm.
it just changed the dynamic entirely. And when Erwin graduated at the end of that year, he came up and he left the line of
Mhm.
graduation, came into the crowd where I was sitting, and he gave me a hug.
Oh.
And so,
Oh.
I was, yeah, that was, even though that was the really tough, scary year, it was just so moving and so gratifying at the end.
That's unforgettable for you. I bet that will also be unforgettable for that student. Might be a life-changing moment for him.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I kept in touch with him for a while, and he was doing
Mhm.
great. So
Yeah, yeah,
thanks.
yeah. And would you please give some advice to our upcoming scholars, especially graduate students?
Yes, I thought about this question. I have so many things. So I'm going to stick with grant
Uh-huh.
writing, because that's something we haven't really talked about. So what I suggest is finding, when you find a solicitation when you want to write a grant for,
Mhm.
know as a new scholar that you probably need someone who has some experience to help you along.
Mhm.
And so go to them, and write smaller grants before
Yeah.
you write those really big grants. And those
Mhm.
smaller grants you can lead, So, but when you write grants, make sure that you're building your ideas from prior grants. And
Mhm.
that's a very fundable way to get, the money that you need to do these things.
Yeah.
So if you have a really big idea for a grant, you might want to break it up into smaller pieces, start small, build a track record,
Mhm.
and then you can, build up along the way. And sometimes you just have to find somebody who's gotten really big grants and be on their team, learn how to do it, and
Mhm.
then you can take your idea and kind of run with it. So it's a building process. So I don't want early scholars to get discouraged if they get declined. Grants are really hard to get, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's a bit of luck.
Mhm.
They just have so many great ideas. They just have to sort of narrow it down, and that where the luck comes in, and that you're on that top of the pile instead of the second in the pile. Um,
Right.
so in terms of grant writing that way,
Mhm.
I would give that advice. So if there's another subject you'd like me to talk about, I'm happy to talk about that too.
Well, do you mind to talk a little about the difference between research and a grant application? Because for a lot of early career scholars and graduate students, they have experience of writing some manuscripts, do research, but for the grant application, like there is no platform, there is no publication they can read. So do you have some suggestion for that?
Yes, yes, I do. Talk with the program officer
Mhm,
would be a very important thing. So in order to talk with the program officer, you should have a one-page synopsis of
mhm.
what you plan on doing.
Yeah.
And I'm mostly um, uh, schooled on NSF grants, so National Science Foundation.
Wow.
And when you write National Science Foundation grants, you need to make sure that you don't write a trust me grant. Every
Mhm,
detail needs to be attended to. So I have kind of two big pieces of advice.
mhm,
The first one is make sure you're addressing a problem that needs to be solved. And you have to
mm,
convince the panel that
mhm.
this problem is very important to be
Yeah.
solved.
Mhm,
Then the second part is show, yes, of course you have a theoretical background because you can't move forward without having a
mhm.
solid foundation,
Right, right.
but you have to show what your research plan and your outcomes and how the people that you're working with can get the job done.
Mhm.
So that's really important in a grant, is every single detail, like down to how will you evaluate it and who are the big names on your advisory board that can give you good advice.
Mm.
Do you have a team that intersects but does not duplicate efforts? So you have to think about your research plan and your team, and
Mhm.
then your external evaluation, and all of those pieces can be put together to get you to that endpoint. So in a way, what you're doing is you're setting a goal, showing the
Mhm.
problem, setting a goal for that problem, and then
Mhm.
showing your strategic planning to get to that goal.
Yeah, that's very practical suggestions.
I cannot see the world without a SRL lens.
Oh,
That is the only lens I have.
yeah, that will be very helpful for graduate students and the upcoming scholars.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other than that, do you have any other suggestions or advice you would like to share with our audience?
I would say when you go to conferences, make
Mhm,
sure you go and you talk with people, because you
mhm,
never know what you're going to
mhm.
learn from someone else.
Right.
We're a community, and so it might feel competitive when you first start,
Mhm.
but it really is a community, and we support each other. And I think we can make a better world. From as corny as it sounds, we could really make a better world when we're all working together and helping each other out.
Yeah, this is so inspiring.
Thanks.
Yes, yes, truly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for your time and your support. And I just hope today's interview will be helpful for graduate students and upcoming scholars too.
I
Thank
do
you.
too. Thank you.